was the Dean's Aide and the Master's Aide, and one of my
I
jobs...
think with everything else happening on campus,
Yeah,
the withdrawal of the chair.
yeah.
So for many of you who are younger generation, you don't remember. Gas station owners would say you should go to the, whites only, and some would say no. And it's a complicated issue.
But anyway, I was chased around the playground, and the kids actually slipped the noose around my neck, hung from the jungle gym.
Students really have a lot of things, even South Asian students, to find a way to then, let's just keep
Part of literature, deconstruct, could be good, they forget when they have not. Women are crying, like told this stuff and people think.
Mobilizing, there may be slightly different motivating factors.
That's an option, and
I guess I think this goes back to our.
Really? Are you downplaying?
Within the United States, when students in 1968 struck for third world liberation, they struck for the people.
One thing I learned from the director I was saw is that
there is no Central American scholar, right? There is no person here on
you must identify alternative sites, right? So the difficult center was on the other side that we also visited. Trying to piece together.
You can raise $5 million.
Peter! Hey, I didn't know you were You're at table number 12, right?
Oh, good for you.
Celebrate a champagne toast. Raise a glass, let the bubbles hit your nose. Cheers to you. Celebrate a champagne toast. Raise your glass, let the bubbles hit your nose. Cheers to you. Celebrate a champagne toast. Here's to you. This is our champagne toast.
I'm sorry, that's
Champagne toast.
Oh my God.
Champagne
from that country in the continent called Asia, the land of K-pop and KBBQ and skincare and Samsung and plastic surgery and crazy dictators. That country neatly split in half by the Cold War and the Korean War and America swooping in to save the day. That war-torn country. Now tens of thousands of people fled to work in plantations and laundromats and restaurants. I'm from that country.
And now we'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, whose appearances are true to her name. We've learned quite a bit about her today already. I already know that her college dating life was miles better than mine. But some things you may not have known about her. She is a self-described, what are the words? Gentle dragon lady. Also, a recent accomplishment of hers as of November 12th, 1989, is forcing her son and daughter to, getting her son and daughter to willingly eat fried calamari. She's a lady of firsts, one of the first Asian American women to graduate from Harvard Law School, first class of women to matriculate at Yale College, co-founder of ASA, founder of Alcyon LLC, and our first and last keynote speaker. We are proud to introduce Alcyon.
Wow, what music.
Sorry.
So, admissions offices say that Asians are nerds and have no personality. Obviously, they didn't meet this group of Yaleys. 50 years ago, around this time of year, I opened an envelope from Yale that welcomed me to the first class of women entering Yale. I had attended co-ed public schools all my life, in DC and Maryland and Virginia and Tokyo, and Kalani Public High School in Hawaii. It was 75% Asian. Only half of my Kalani classmates went to college, and no one had gone to Yale. With no financial resources for college, I attended the University of Hawaii, which was 90% Asian Pacific locals already living in Hawaii. For my sophomore year, I got a scholarship to Georgetown, which in those days was male, pale, and mostly Catholic. Not exactly my profile. When Yale and Princeton both decided in 1968 to go co-ed, I applied to see what all this Ivy envy was all about. And I got into both, and I decided from the brochures that both campuses looked nice, but Yale had the better East Asian Studies program. Of course, no one had told me about the difference between what New Haven looked like in those days and what Princeton looked like in those days as towns. So until I arrived on the Yale campus in September of 1969, Yale College was 100% male, and mostly from prep schools. There were only 9 Asians in my entire class, some of whom are sitting here today, 5 men and 4 women, out of a total of 1,200 students. There were 1,200 because the Yale alums wanted to have 1,000 male leaders. So they had to add on the women in that first class rather than take away 200 from the 1,000 male leaders. The overwhelming focus back then in September of 1969 was on us as women, whether we were going to be too smart for the men, whether they would be too distracted by having females on campus during the week, whether the Yale male traditions would perish. These were legitimate fears, apparently, before we arrived. I was first dean's aide and then master's aide, and one of my many jobs was to try to reassure visiting alumni that we were actually pretty nice, smart women who were not going to destroy the institution of Yale. As I pointed out in my NPR All Things Considered interview that aired last November, Yale, however, hadn't really thought about the practical things for women. For example, they had the women in entryways, and they took out the urinals in the bathrooms, but they didn't adjust the mirrors. And they were so high that literally if I wanted to see myself, I had to jump up and down in the bathroom to do so. I saw a few women in my classes and on campus, but I almost never saw a fellow Asian American. It was in the middle of the Vietnam War when gooks, that's what we were considered the enemy. Freshman roommates of Don Nakanishi, my classmate, thought nothing of pelting him with water balloons on Pearl Harbor Day in December, shouting, "Bombs over Tokyo." That was considered fine, just a joke. In my case, I could tell that returning Yale Vietnam War veterans and alums were wondering why an Asian girl like me, whom they had only encountered in Vietnam as a bar hostess or the enemy, could possibly be a Yale College student. In many ways, the founding of ASA for me personally was in part the search for a community and for an identity in what was for me an alien, predominantly white male preppy world. There was no internet or campus Facebook. So when we were starting ASA, we literally had to go through reams of student names to try to figure out who was Asian. You have no idea how many Youngs, Parks, and Lees are not Asian. The story of how we found fellow Asians has been told often, but once our little band of brothers and a few sisters first gathered at Don Nakanishi's college, Saybrook, in the dining hall. Saybrook? All right, I'm from Deport, so what can I say? Whatever. But we were able to, in those days, gather, whoever had the rice cooker was the center of the social circle. And we all brought various care packages from home and cooked meals. I found it amusing this morning to hear the stories of the various Yalees who were talking about whether the biryani rice in one college was better than in another college. No such luxury. There was no rice, maybe once a month Uncle Ben's in the cafeteria. We realized there was no Asian American organization at Yale or anywhere really in the Ivies. So we founded ASA. We formed a so-called central committee to kind of organize things, which shows the sort of socialist 60s roots of this formation. And we started the publication Banana Peel, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. And Lowell and Don founded Amerasia Journal, which, as you've heard, to this day still it was the first and the leading Asian American journal. As a part of another project, we invited East Coast colleges and local high schools to Yale on April 18, 1970, for the first East Coast Asian American Conference. This was the era of anti-Vietnam War protests, Yale union workers' strikes, the rise of Black Power and the Chicano movement, and the Black Panther trials in New Haven. And finally, we all began to come to a realization that there was this long history we didn't really know about in America of discrimination against Asian Americans, starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first time that America had ever excluded an entire race from our country. That was 1882. The Asian Exclusion Act of 1924, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. So out of all this newfound knowledge was born this desire to really study and learn from this history of discrimination. We were able to create the template for the Asian American Experience program, or course, which was offered in the spring of 1970. The thought that someday there would be an Asian American Studies program at Yale, however, like the fantastic program at UCLA that Don Nakanishi subsequently was really very key in developing, sadly seems unfulfilled still, at Yale. And sadly, Don is not with us to celebrate this 50th anniversary. But I'm very happy that Marcia is here to represent him. Marcia's right there. Even though we know she went to Harvard.
But I'm wearing blue.
But she's wearing blue. Meanwhile, we realized that to increase our numbers, we really needed to actively recruit Asian American students to come to Yale, especially from public schools, since Yale already recruited heavily from private schools. So, as they say, if you ever read any children's stories, if you give a mouse a cookie, there's this chain of things that happens or needs to happen. So we convinced the admissions office to send Don and Glenn Omatsu, me, John Kodama, a handful of people. They gave us the grand sum of $600 for 2 weeks, including airfare, which I was trying to get back to Hawaii, to recruit in public schools in our hometown. So we did that in December of 1969. But in order to be sure that accepted students would actually come to Yale, and if they came, to ensure that they actually felt comfortable. Remember, no rice in any of the dining halls. We needed a structure and a network. And so we petitioned for what now seems terribly arcane terminology, third world floating counselors, to help the freshmen adjust. So in addition to serving as master's aide and being a member of the ASA Central Committee, and a recruiter for the admissions office. I actually worked in the admissions office also, and a member of the Yale, so-called Yale Executive Committee, which was students and Yale administration. I was also a floating counselor. And all these bits and pieces that we put together with really no template in those days. Now it seems de rigueur, but it was really our trying to think through what the consequences of all of this would be and what the concerns might be. So with these efforts, we had tremendous success. From 9 Asian Americans in the class of 1971, we expanded in 3 short years to 34 Asian Americans entering the class of 1974. I was told by several alums that the mere fact that my picture as a Yale student was in the admissions introduction to Yale, the brochure, made them feel a little more comfortable that they saw an Asian face and a woman's face in the brochure of Yale students, and made them feel that they could apply to Yale. So it's those little things that made a difference. After my experiences at Yale, I was prepared when I entered Harvard Law School in the fall of 1974 to be one of only 54 women out of a class of 560, and only 3 Asian Americans in my entire class. There weren't even enough Asian Americans to start in ASA, so I was actually adopted by the Black Law Students Association for my 3 years in Cambridge. My skill sets from Yale, creating organizations, initiating programs, advocating, negotiating, building consensus, surviving in a man's world, all of this really were a tool set that I was taught at Yale that really came in handy. When I graduated from Harvard, I debated between going into civil rights activism through a job at the Office for Civil Rights. My mentor was Professor Derek Bell, who was a renowned civil rights activist and a member of the faculty of the Harvard Law School, or a political life in Hawaii. I had gotten a clerkship under Supreme Court Chief Justice Richardson of the Hawaii Supreme Court. But in the end, my passion for East Asian studies, which had actually brought me to Yale in the first place, and had given me the opportunity at Yale to study on a Bates Fellowship in Japan under Nobel Prize winner in literature Yasunari Kawabata, took me to the field of international law, specializing in Asia. all those skill sets also gave me the foundation to build a successful Asia-related international corporate law practice. And that, for actually 45 years, has allowed me to both follow my passions and to make a difference. So what did I do using all of the things that I'd learned through ASA and through Yale? I was able to create business and cultural bridges between Asia and the US through private ventures and organizations, not-for-profit organizations such as Asia Foundation, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee of 100, which was founded by I.M. Pei and Yo-Yo Ma after the Tiananmen events, an organization for Chinese Americans to try to make a difference. I was able to come up with practical solutions to difficult legal and cultural problems as a result of all the things I had learned at Yale and in working on ASA and the various other activities. I was able to assist nonprofits like Aspen Institute, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I was able to help entrepreneurs and artists, including our alum Maya Lin, when she was very famous for having done the Vietnam War Memorial, but very poor. I was able to mentor and coach probably close to 1,000 women and minorities over the years through organizations and also just informally when they asked. I also gave as much as I could back to Yale because I was so appreciative of the kind of education I had gotten and the kind of strength and confidence I had developed as a result of coming here. So I spoke on numerous Yale career panels. I came back to talk to students about careers. I worked with the Alumni Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. I keynoted at the first All-AV Woman Power Summit in Beijing that was set up by a Yalie who had graduated from Yale. And I continue to serve as a fellow of Davenport College. I also was able to prove that women could have successful careers but not have to sacrifice having a family, even if balance is, trust me, really not possible. My two wonderful grown children can attest to my multitasking skills that I learned at Yale and are convinced that I had eyes in the back of my head. And it's the kind of crazy life that you have to figure out, and everyone has to have their own way of figuring it out. But I was really felt that it was important to, having been in that first class of women at Yale, to make a difference and to show that it was possible to have a career and a life. When I received the Justice in Action Award from ALDEF, Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, in 2004, it wasn't for my litigating skills or defending civil rights cases, but it was for building constituencies, for advocating privately and in the press, and fundraising for important causes. And now, in semi-retirement, I have the freedom to consult on Asia without having to deal with any of those horrible, dreaded billable hours. For any of you considering law, it's unfortunately still a part of life. So that little ripple in the pond that was ASA 50 years ago has really swelled. And it's just remarkable that there are 51 Asian American organizations on campus under the umbrella of, under Joliana's expert hand at AACC. But there's still so much left to be done. We've gone from, as Asian Americans, from being considered scarce to being considered overabundant at private and public universities, in New York City elite public high schools. And I think the Harvard admissions case has put affirmative action on a collision course with anti-Asian bias. with the fallout, unfortunately, largely suffered by us Asian Americans, no matter which side wins in this case. The admissions scandal, recent one, points out how skewed legacy and money advantages have become. Just as we Asian American alums have finally reached sufficient numbers to actually lay a small claim through legacy. Chinese American scientists like Wen-Ho Lee in years past and Sherry Chen and others more recently continue to be unjustly accused of espionage, ruining their livelihoods and their lives. The fact that in this era of focus on diversity and inclusion and the challenges we face on immigration and detention, the refugee crisis, rising white nationalism, racial violence, voting rights, climate migration, racial and socioeconomic inequality, ER&M has had issues. And thank God, and thank you, President Salave, for having promised to remedy the situation by the end of this term. So tomorrow is actually my 69th birthday. So it's now exactly 50 years from 1969 when I first came to Yale. I feel so lucky to be able to celebrate with you 50 years later what we started in 1969. But please remember that if you want to be able to make a small difference in the world, it doesn't matter whether you're 19, 29, or 69. You can start anytime. In fact, there's no really good time to start. You're all very, very busy. But in fact, if you start early, it just becomes a habit to do things in small ways that make a difference. You can contribute, the famous 3 W's: work, wisdom, or wealth. And your Yale education equips you with at least the wisdom and the work to make a difference. The wealth you gotta figure out on your own. I started early and it has enriched my life and given back to me so much more than I ever put in. So I urge you all to throw that little idea, whether it's ASA or something else, into the pond. Get your classmates and your friends to do it too. And a little money thrown in doesn't hurt. And help it triple, ripple, expand, and hopefully someone in your or the next generation will have benefited from an organization as enduring as ASA. So, happy birthday, ASA.